Welcome back to Outside the Bubble, episode number 5. This is a podcast of entrepreneurs and builders in our 20s, 30s, and 40s, building businesses and trying to make sense of the interesting times we live in and having raw, unscripted conversations along the way. In this episode, we are joined by friend of the show, Sean Gagan. Sean, welcome back.
Lovely to be here. I'm looking forward to having a chat again.
And of course, we're joined by Apurva, co-founder of Outside the Bubble. How's it going, Apurva?
Hey, Arsalan. Great to be here. Yeah, lots going on in the world of building in tech. So just excited to talk about all the topics that we have coming up today.
Do you want to introduce yourself really quick to the people watching?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm Apurva. I build and invest in early stage tech startups. I'm also building a couple of interesting non-tech businesses in Southeast Asia and involved with a couple of businesses in the UAE and the Nordics. So really, really excited about how tech and AI is shaping every aspect of the modern world. Also nervous about it. So I think that's part of the reason why we started this, to try and figure out how technology is starting to actually seep into every aspect of our life. Thank you for that, Arsalan.
You're wonderful.
How about yourself? Tell us a bit about yourself.
Thank you. So I'm Arsalan. I'm an AI engineer and consultant and a co-founder at Quadruple AI, where we work with enterprises in Australia, in Europe, and in the Middle East. And we're just, always looking at the frontier of change, and we're always surprised by what we find. And I think there's lots of reasons to be optimistic about where AI is headed and lots of reasons not to. And yeah, we're just trying to use this podcast as a way to sort of steer the conversation a bit and share our perspective of everything that we find interesting every few weeks. Sean, can we get a quick introduction from you as well, please?
Sure. So I've been in and around tech for about 25 years now as a CTO of Sendal. Also do a bunch of tech advisory for startups in Australia. And more recently tech leadership at a couple of different places. Keen to get into some of the more social aspects of this stuff as well. So I think we've got a good agenda that's going to touch on a bunch of different areas. So excited to chat.
Yeah, excellent. So in this episode, we're going to talk about 3 things. And we're going to start by talking about these, frankly, incredible results coming out of some of the research labs in China, specifically Deepseek, where their smallest model is able to beat Fable5 on Terminal Bench 2.1. So we'll talk a little bit about that and the implications of, that improvement in tech. We'll also touch on Nvidia. So there's been a lot of, new novel financial things happening with GPUs, and we've got lots of questions for Apurva there. And then we'll round the conversation out with, just talking generally about capitalism and what's going on in US politics with Trump's Truth Social subscription. So to start off, I wanted to get into this Deepseek research result that this came out 2 or 3 days ago. So it's fairly recent, and I'll just put this up on my screen really quick. So this tweet came across my timeline, and this researcher, Jackie, he or she, sorry, I should have looked that up. So they shared these results there you go. So they shared these results that, DeepSeek V4 Flash, they've put together this technique, which is essentially just a technique that you can put into your AI harness that allows you to scale the coding ability of your model. And it's a significant result. So it goes from 79 to 88%. And it does this being 11 times cheaper than Fable5 on the same benchmark without any retraining or any, novel architecture. And I find that incredible. See, I read a lot of research headlines about what's happening in the AI space. And it's exceedingly rare that I will see something that forces me to reevaluate a position I've had for as long as I've been working in this space. And I'll tell you what that is in a moment. I'll tell you what's changed. But let me quickly describe why I think this is so incredible and what's being described in this research. So, for 2 years now, we've been working with these reasoning models. And this is a pattern that OpenAI first implemented, where they essentially try to simulate system 1 and system 2 thinking in these, language models. And the results that they produce on benchmarks, but also in real world use cases, significantly improved, right? And I want to emphasize this, reasoning models across the board, people believe perform better in real world uses, right? So it's not just benchmarks that show these significant improvements. What a reasoning model does is before it puts its final output out, it takes a moment and there's a smaller AI model which just generates a whole load of text, which is relevant to the user's query. And what happens is by doing this, the AI model gets to produce all the tokens that it should think about before giving you an answer. So instead of the model just instantly saying, this is what I think the answer is. It produces a whole lot of tokens that allow it to think along various directions. And those tokens go into the input, and then the final output is surprisingly a lot better than if it hadn't done that step. This idea essentially just pushes that even further. Okay. The research isn't linked, but the way I see it, what they've done is they said that AI models actually have a lot of intelligence that we don't capture if we just look at the final output, right? There's a lot of richness in the AI model that collapses if you just give it one close-ended task. And the specific pattern that we're looking into is this pattern that's called LLM as a judge, where you have an AI model judge the output of another AI model, which is an actor. Okay, so let's say you have an actor agent and a judging agent. The actor agent is given a task, and it does everything. It does the reasoning, it calls the tools, and it produces a result. And it also outputs a trace. And a trace is just all the steps that it took. The judging agent looks at the trace, it looks at all the tokens that were produced in the middle, and then it outputs a score. And it says, I think that this trace is 80% good or 75% good or something like that, right? And the judging agent, of course, is told what the right output looks like. So it's not just hazarding a guess, it's being told exactly what the right thing to do is, and it just compares the output of the actor agent to an ideal version that's produced by a human. What these guys did was they said, what if we could improve the way a judging agent acts by getting it to produce a lot more nuance about why it assigns the score it does? Okay. And just imagine that you can look deeper into an LLM, take a look at the actual math that's happening underneath. You don't have to look too deep. That's the interesting thing. You can just fetch the results from an API call. So you don't have to look too deep. And just with a little bit of math, you can significantly improve the quality of your LLM as a judge. Now, if you have a better judge and you have a model that is hundreds of times cheaper than your frontier model, you can afford to produce more than one candidate solution to the task that you gave your agent, your original acting agent. So in their research, they tried with 3 different repeats and 5 repeats. And when you have your acting agent do the same task 5 times, and you have this judge that is scoring these attempts, with more nuance, the end result is that you can pick the actions, or you can pick the attempt that performed the best with a significantly better confidence. That's all these guys did, is they combined a cheaper model and a better way to score AI outputs using AI itself, because it is intelligent and it produces better results on a benchmark. So if I go back to, where I started with these reasoning agents, because they were such a significant shift in real world use, I really think that this is one of those techniques that people are going to start to pick up and start putting in their harnesses that are built specifically for smaller, cheaper models, so that they can produce dozens of candidate solutions, score all of them, without any rework to the model itself, and then just get much better outputs. Now, like I said, this is one of the things that, I started this by saying that this has really challenged a view I had since the very beginning, which is that when we're doing agentic engineering and we're working with enterprises, people like me tend to want to build more conservative solutions than experimental ones, because at the end of the day, what we believe is that if you scope a problem well enough, you don't need agents 99% of the time. And this is true, right? If you scope a problem well enough, you can put most of it in deterministic code, and you can inject AI agents in specific places. And that makes your system extremely reliable, but it also delivers the value. Up until now, there was no reason to do a bunch of experimentation in live enterprise workflows up until now. But that's not true anymore. If you can take a model that is hundreds of times cheaper than the frontier models, it's available over an API, you don't have to host it, you don't have to do anything specific. You just build this functionality into your harness, and suddenly you actually can approach a world where you can produce AI outputs that sound less and less like slop. You can get your agent to write a press release because your judging agent can just judge 50 variants of a press release, or 50 variants of a board pack, or 50 variants of a slide deck, right? And you can just do it in a way that doesn't blow up your token budget. And it's very likely that over time, these agents with this harness are just going to improve. So another thing that is important to point out here is that agents are trained now inside of a harness. So all the improvements that we see in agents over the last 12 months happen because of a technique that's called reinforcement learning. In reinforcement learning, you train an AI model based on actions that it takes, right? But in the last, 12, 24 months, however long it's been, agents are used exclusively inside a harness. There's a lot of packaging around an AI model. So even during training, these models are trained inside of a harness. So the coding agents in Anthropic or the codex models in OpenAI are trained inside of their coding harnesses, which is Claude Code and Codex for OpenAI respectively. So the models improve based on what the harness allows. So if this is a development that gets picked up by the big labs, OpenAI and Anthropic and Deepseek, and the open source harnesses like Hermes pick it up, Pi agent picks it up, I can't think of anything else. If these harnesses pick this pattern up, the agents will get reinforced with this training paradigm of producing dozens and dozens and dozens of candidate solutions, and a judging agent, which is designed to judge AI outputs according to a specification or a skill, right? We actually might accelerate into a world very quickly where the AI output just feels so much better and is worthy of enterprise grade workflows. So yeah, I think this is an incredible result, and I'm excited to follow this result, and I want to see where it goes, because all the big harness designs, they all started like this. And for the longest time, LLM as a judge was something that I scoffed at. I honestly didn't think it was that interesting for enterprise grade work anyway. It was interesting in the coding space, but definitely not for real world use. But it's flipped on its head now.
One of the things that jumps out at me at this, the orchestration is only feasible because DeepSeek is so much cheaper. To generate 5 solutions and then run an LLM to verify those 5 solutions. And obviously 5 is something that, as the problem gets more complicated, 5 will likely have to be a much larger number. So you're looking at, scaling costs significantly.
Yeah.
That's only really possible because DeepSeek itself is so much cheaper for some reason.
Agreed. And DeepSeek did put out a notice that their models are going to get slightly more expensive soon. I say slightly, but that's actually the wrong word. They said that their models are going to have a significant difference in cost very soon, and people should plan accordingly. But this result is 11 times cheaper than Fable5's attempt at the same benchmark. So even after doing the same thing 5 times and verifying it, it's so much cheaper. Now, I find this interesting because if you have these open source models that you can self-host, for example, you have these 20 to 30 billion parameter models that you can run on a MacBook. And if you apply the same harness to those models, you can potentially be at Cursor's model, for example, for coding, that you can just run on your machine for no cost at all. Now, this is coding, and it's a very specific domain where you can actually test what's working and what isn't. But if you think about applying this to domains where you have non-falsifiable answers, if you're looking at business strategy, or you're looking at how to edit a document in a specific way, or something of that nature where you can't necessarily verify the output, those workflows now you can encode in just having these LLM loops generate dozens and dozens of candidate responses, and just have them be judged. I think I find this super interesting because it's all the reasons I had to not consider pure LLM workflows in the past they're starting to be torn down. I can't reasonably say anymore that I wouldn't want to put, so much of an enterprise workflow into a purely stochastic process because the output isn't going to be good enough. I didn't even think LLM as a judge was a cost-effective thing for most enterprises to do until I saw this result.
On that point, do you know what the LLM as a verifier is actually doing here? Because the test suite itself should be deterministically verifiable. So what is it doing?
Great question. So in normal LLMs as a judge, all you do is you create essentially a prompt and you tell the LLM what you think good looks like. Right? So you'll say that we are trying to judge this specific task, and the right execution for this task goes through these steps. It's this tool call followed by this tool call with this kind of reasoning in the middle, and this is the final output. And this can be arbitrarily long. In the labs, they're trying to get these LLMs to do extremely long tasks, like produce entire miniature software from one shot. So it could be 50 turns, it could be 150 turns. Who knows? There's a lot of math, there's a lot of nuance that just getting an LLM to produce one output score gets lost in. For example, if you ask an LLM as a judge to say, tell me how good this workflow executed, it'll reason and it'll think about it, and it'll say something like, I give this workflow or this execution a 67 or an 83 or a 95. Just looking at that one number isn't very useful, right? But what if you could look at the score an LLM outputs and also the confidence with which it outputs that score, right? And then what if you could do that for a range of scores in just one shot? So if I said a judging LLM can give you the confidence of assigning a particular score for 10 different score like bands in one shot, right? That's basically what they're doing. So for example, if this trace is worthy of an A, which corresponds to, in our reasoning, let's say it's like 90 to 100, output the letter A. Otherwise, output B if it's between 80 and 90, and a C if it's between 70 and 80, and so on. And we can keep going until like an F, all right? Anything below that is a fail, or F is a fail. If you force the LLM to produce just that output, when you look at the token that it outputs, the final token, you can also look at the probabilities that it assigned to all the other tokens. That's how LLMs work, is they produce an output probability over a range of tokens, and they pick the one that's most likely most of the time. So in this case, they produce a range of probabilities over all the potential score bands that you gave it, A through F. And what these guys do is, instead of just looking at the max weighted token, they produce a score that's weighted. So they'll do A times its probability, plus B times its probability, plus C times its probability, and so on. And you can replace the letters A, B, and C with the score that we allocated to it. So for example, if A was 95 and B was 85 and C was 85, so you would do 95 times its probability, plus 85 times its probability, plus 75 times its probability, and then you just average it. And this gives you a much richer score. In their GitHub repo and in their paper, they call it a continuous score instead of just one discrete score. You can take that one continuous score and you can do the same calculation across all the candidate solutions. And then you have, very well judged candidate solutions that you can pick the best from. Just doing that improves the bench score from 78 to 88, 77 to 88%, which is incredible.
And it's doing that on a per token level?
No, it's only doing that on the token output of the judge, the final token output.
Right.
So you go from like a single token output to a continuous token, like a continuous probability output across the runs that your agents have done. And basically you're able to pick out which candidate solution performed the best from across the ones that were generated. And the output is so much better.
Is this at the end of the day just benchmaxing though?
I don't think so. In my mind, benchmaxing would mean it only performs well on a specific benchmark and then it totally collapses in the real world. But this isn't like training the model to do anything specific. It's actually like, if you think about it statistically, it makes total sense. You're taking a model that is stochastic. So you're creating a whole bunch of normally distributed responses, and then you're trying to aggregate them in a way that you get the best possible result. So statistically, like mathematically, it makes sense to me. Yes, I wouldn't say it's actually benchmaxing. I would say it's I would be interested to see this kind of technique incorporated into all like the major harnesses like Hermes or Claude Code, and then see what that does.
Let me ask you guys this question. So how much of this is actually something Deepseek or even like the makers of these open source models, how much of this can be short-term manipulated to look in their favor? And I'm trying to approach this from a slightly different angle, right? Like, how much compute is actually going into actually being a better model? Is that something that's verifiable, or is it self-reported? We know historically there has been reasons to doubt private enterprises and governments who are self-reporting their resource utilization and their efficiencies. Given where we stand with the AI ecosystem and how US versus China is playing out on the trade front, on the AI front, on the geopolitical front, I'm questioning the legitimacy of I'm not saying that DeepSeek is misreporting or China is playing a game here, but can we just take the model's own resource utilization as gospel and say, okay, so Anthropic is saying that they need X amount of compute to do the same work. DeepSeek is taking 1/10 of that, and then that's just a fact. Like how much of this is on public monitoring systems? How much of this resource side of it is
versus
open source? I get the quality output is open source, so you can benchmark the output, but I want to know how much of the input is open source.
is your like conspiracy theory spidey sense there ringing a further that maybe this whole stuff's just massively subsidized by the Chinese government? Is that what you're
I
getting
mean,
at?
yeah, well, I wouldn't say conspiracy theory. I just feel that if I were in the game of geopolitics today, which I think all the major economies are, I think there is a proper realignment going on in geopolitics actively. US has somehow cornered itself to become a large technology bet. US, to me, and this could be my limited view, appears to be a giant corporation that is saying, we're going to go to space. We're going to create robots. We're going to, our entire economy, US's entire economy rides on the fact that tech is going to change the world and the tech will come out of the US. That feels like it's sort of headline story at the moment with Trump at helm, right? If that is what China is picking up, it's in their active interest to make US technology look not that great, right? It can disproportionately invest. It's starting to do that with cars that look like almost as good as Tesla's, which was the first wave of tech that came out of there. Now it's starting to do with recoverable rockets. And there is no reason for it to not do that with AI and compute there, right? It just has to say to the world that everything that US can do, we can almost do it as well for 1/10 the price. And that's sort of the story China has been putting out there for pretty much everything for the last 2 decades. So I don't see why China will change its model on anything. It's talking about a 5th generation fighter aircraft, which cost 1/10 of the F-35s that US is trying to showcase as the best fighter aircraft in the world. Like that's their story.
Strategically
That's
it
their
makes sense. Yeah, like the underlying question is why is it cheaper? Like, and
and then the question is what?
Yeah, that's a simple question. Like, I don't think we have like, across all of those things. Like, why is the Chinese EVs cheaper? Why is like the AI models cheaper? And traditionally, it's been a labor thing. Coming out of China.
I still think it has a big labor thing because it's not just about labor availability. It's about the base cost of operating daily life. I don't know if the base cost of living in Shanghai is 1/10 cheaper than New York. I don't know that, or San Francisco, but I know it's cheaper. I don't think a top quality Chinese engineer needs the same amount of money to survive have a decent daily life in Shanghai or Beijing than in San Francisco. San Francisco is fundamentally expensive, and that's because taxes, it's because of whatever reasons, the cost of living is that high that people need to earn $300,000 to feel like they're living a normal life, right? In China, that number could be $100,000 or even lower because you can feel much better. So I feel like that's one foundational aspect. But of course, when it comes to AI, there's chips, there is access to energy and so on that makes it so much more complicated as a question. So I guess just going back to my original question, I feel like if you look at the equation of DeepSeek being cheaper and almost as good, I think there are 2 aspects to that equation, right? One is the input cost, and then the other bit is the output of the product itself. I feel like the output can be benchmarked, but I'm wondering if the input cost is being benchmarked, right? And where is that compute coming from?
I'm not entirely sure that output can be benchmarked, but that's a whole other diversion.
Yeah. It can only be benchmarked in places where you can verify the output. Like even in code, it's so difficult to produce benchmarks that are comprehensive.
Yeah, to a certain degree, let's put it that way, right?
We can compare their performance on specific benchmarks. Yes, what that tells you about how useful they are in the real world, as much as these benchmarks try to be real world tests. I think that's questionable.
Yeah. I'll take a stab at answering your question. So the first thing is like DeepSeek's models are open source. So like anybody can actually just get them and run them on their own hardware. So if you have enough GPU resources to run a massive model, you'll be able to run it and you should be able to see like how much it costs to serve that model. So like that's something that you can't necessarily hide. However, the API that DeepSeek themselves offer is extremely cheap. Like the numbers don't make any sense. So like that's where the things that you were talking about, like the energy cost, I think is the big one, that China has so much energy and they're producing so many like power plants that they're not worried about providing energy to their data centers to serve these models. DeepSeek, the model itself, it uses a specific like neural network architecture that is cheaper to serve. How much cheaper it will be to serve in the US, I'll have to look those numbers up, but it's called a mixture of experts. So like a quarter of the model is active on average for any given query, which is very different from the architecture that OpenAI and Anthropic reportedly use, where they use a very dense model, right? So the model is cheaper. Like there's no getting around this. Even Cursor, for example, their flagship coding model is built on like they've fine-tuned a model that uses a mixture of experts. It's a Chinese model that they use. I think it's called Kimi or something. Kimi K3.
Kimi
So
K3, yeah.
yeah, so these models are fundamentally cheaper. There's no, like, you can't get around that fact. They aren't at frontier level, and like their models aren't producing like novel research, but like and this is like the question of what their strategy is. I think the strategy for Chinese models is to bring this like token level intelligence to the masses, like for widespread enterprise use, where the cost does not become like a prohibitive factor. But for labs like OpenAI and Anthropic, their whole brand is built around reaching AGI. Like I've never heard any news around Deepseek's research lab saying we're trying to build a model that's just going to get to AGI and then, recursively improve to get to ASI. But Anthropic and OpenAI's valuations depend on that claim, right? So I think
I find that comment really intriguing, Arsalan. I'm sorry, I'm sort of interrupting you there, but if I want to make an important point here, and this is something that Chinese business community and Chinese entrepreneurs and tech folks have been so effective at doing for the last 2 to 3 decades, right? What you just said, right? I think what happens is, and you can look at it in like hardware play, and you can look at it in software play and everywhere else. In racing, for instance, there is this sort of I don't know, theory or strategy where the second place person just trails the first place person pretty much most of the race, because it gives them the aerodynamic edge, because the first place person is actually having to take all the headwind, fight all the headwind throughout, and you're conserving energy being right behind the second person, as a second person, right behind the first person throughout the race, conserving your energy till the finish line is approaching. And then last minute, you sort of just jump out in front because now you have a little bit more bank of energy. And all you need to do is not creatively think. All you need to do is just trail that person. Make sure you're keeping pace with that person. Right? That happens in Formula One racing. It happens in bicycles or in, Tour de France and so on. And it happens in marathons as well. You will always see the last 100 meters in a marathon becomes really interesting because somebody would then suddenly find the energy to outrun the guy in the front because they're spent. China sort of effectively deploys this long-term gameplay where it doesn't take the burden to try and chart out a future path of where all these frontier technologies are going. It just says to itself, America wants to take the lead. It wants to act like the big daddy. I'm just going to be good enough to be in the running, right? I'll be in the reckoning. I'll be in the race for the longest time till there is an arbitrary finish line, and then they sort of jump in the front and they're just now better than, let's say, their American counterparts. And I find that strategy playing out again here, where I think the point you just mentioned, where Anthropic and OpenAI are constantly trying to shift the goalpost and say, this is what the future of AI looks like. China just goes, okay, if that is what it looks like, here is a 1/10 cost model that does pretty much what you're saying today, slightly better. Like China didn't 2 years ago say that we're going to create a Fable5 competitor in 2 years from now. It didn't say that. It didn't have to say it. It just have to ask his question, how are the Americans doing it? And can we do some tweaking to their model or their foundational ideas and just do it marginally better at a lower cost, right? And I just find that extremely intriguing that that's a sort of a playbook they're going with.
Yeah. Do either of you know how much money, and like to play off that, I guess, how much money has been invested in the Chinese models? Because the analogy you have there, Apurva, is that the front runner is spending so much energy to just stay in front for the entirety of the race until the very last mile or whatever. Yeah, we know how much the US has invested in these models, but how much has China invested?
I mean, that's the thing, right? Like the input costs are quite opaque in coming out of China, right? And you have to trust the local government and the local, the businesses saying what they're saying, right? So, I mean, if you're taking their word for it, as Arsalan is saying, the models are cheap. So I'm assuming that even if they're operating at break even and not trying to make a ton of profits, they are probably not incurring as much costs as the Americans are. But China has been accused of government subsidies or the Chinese government subsidizing innovation in China, right? And because
the US government subsidizes it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's fine.
Yeah. And that's the thing, right? Like, it's sort of like there are some industries that you just need to have a certain scale to be able to enter. There's a reason why like Australia can't suddenly enter AI chip manufacturing and say, yeah, we just want to be the best at it, right? Like, I think Australia as a country will have to drop everything and then just focus all its energies on that if that's what it wanted to do, right? And so I feel like there is a bit of that that is happening everywhere. And I think China and US are the two places where it's playing out in real time. And I just find that sort of don't try to be too clever. Let US keep deciding what are the battlegrounds that they want to be better at. And then just China come and show 6 months later, I can do it too. And that just gives it an enough edge to say, yeah, they're equally relevant and they're always in the running. And they just don't have to be the number one player.
The open source play is interesting as well in that, like, the very least it gives people a low cost way where you don't have to pay a provider to be able to use a model locally for the things that people would pay for a Claude subscription for. Like, it kind of completely undercuts the market there. So yeah, it's an interesting strategy. It's not really surprising, and I kind of like the fact that it's not thumping an AGI drum and talking about all of these things that sound like bad sci-fi. That's good.
Yeah, I feel this topic sort of conveniently leans into the next one about chips and processors. Arsalan, do you want to introduce that one for the
So like
for the conversation?
At the beginning of this year, 2026, we were hearing a lot about like the circular financing and the debt that like these large companies are taking out in Silicon Valley to build out these data centers. And part of that was Nvidia essentially working with, I want to say like Wall Street because of like the lack of my knowledge, but I'll have questions about this later. But essentially like GPUs were becoming collateral for these massive loans. And 6-7 months later, we are now at the stage where Nvidia just put out this piece, and I'll put it up on screen really quick, which is AI factories are becoming an investable asset class for all of these massive, are they private equity firms? I don't even know what Blackstone and BlackRock are technically, but just very rich companies that have a lot of money and a lot of like these massive insurance companies, like funds and pension funds that they direct. And I just have a lot of questions. Like, first of all, what even is going on? Like, what does it mean to be an investable asset class? And what does it mean to make GPUs, I guess, a security backed asset? Is that what it is?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So
yeah, maybe you
Sean,
want to like, I was say, go like educate us as the person on the call that knows the most about the finance side of things at Perva. Like, maybe educate us on what's actually going on, and then Arsalan and I can ask questions that expose our ignorance or the rampant corruption in the finance system, or both.
Yeah, and look, I don't mean to sound like an expert on this particular topic because obviously there's a lot of financial engineering going on here by Nvidia and a few other partners that is circled up. I'm sure we've all sort of during the course of the year heard a lot about the circular financing that's going on in the AI ecosystem. So this is not too different, or this is not too detached from that whole idea where there is a AI story and a narrative that was built for the last couple of years where foundational technology was found to be very innovative, surprised quite a few people in the beginning. And then a bunch of companies decided, how do we monetize this attention and this curiosity that everyone's got around this sort of technology, and really like 100x that or 1000x that, right? I mean, so much so that even the first sort of proper large cap space company that got listed called itself an AI company, right? Like that's sort of the weight behind the story, right? That no matter who you are, you're sort of an AI company, and that's the power of the storytelling that's been going on for the last 2 years, is the way I see it. Now, coming to this specific story about Nvidia looking at making GPUs or compute like an investable asset class. Look, in some ways, this is not a new idea. If you know commodities, if you know how commodities work, why does oil cost what it costs? Why does wheat, grain, gold, anything costs what it does? Is because they are typically exchange traded in certain commodity exchange markets around the world. One of the biggest criticisms you hear about making anything investable or tradable is the lifespan of that underlying asset. So, one of the things that most people talk a lot about when it comes to technology is the finite sort of age of technology, or how quickly it sort of degrades within a certain period of time. I find that argument a little bit challenging because degradation is part of most asset classes. I mean, unlike certain things. So for instance, all edible commodities degrade, right? You have wheat is traded today in commodity exchanges. They have a very finite shelf life. Wheat doesn't last forever, right? So degradation is part of a lot of commodities that are traded. I think what people miss out on is trying to understand that when you put a tradable commodity on an exchange, you're always putting the value with the context of its tradable life cycle. Oil is consumable. 1,000-year-old oil will not be usable in the same way in your cars without refinement, right? Like there is all sorts of things that need to happen to the same commodity. So I guess in some ways, what Nvidia or Jensen's trying to refer to is how do you commoditize compute, right? How do you get to a stage where it's so necessary for the progression of the AI future that you almost need to commoditize compute in the same way that we've been able to commoditize several different things prior, right? And I think that's where they're sort of coming in and trying to create a market for it by getting a bunch of private equity, a bunch of venture folks to come in and make it a tradable class. And this is the theory of it, by the way, right? So I'm going to pause there just to sort of say, are you with me so far, and is it making sense?
Yeah, I think that the analogy to a consumable commodity doesn't make that much sense to me because that
the demand is always there.
there's always the demand for wheat, and its value is consumed at the point of consumption. And there's a supply chain involved in that has costs associated with it. And when you're investing in it, you're investing in the successful execution of that supply chain to the point of consumption, and then that unit is consumed. Maybe this is a long way of saying there's no depreciation associated with the bale of wheat, I would assume. Spoilage, I'm sure, is a factor, and that's part of the risk that you take on when you invest in a spoilable commodity. That makes sense to me. The thing
and you just said it, the spoilage piece, right? Like I think just so you know, the depreciation of wheat or the degradation of wheat quality is the shelf life, right? So every bushel of wheat or whatever sack of wheat, I don't know what their commodity type is or unit is, that stays in the warehouse closer to its expiry theoretically degrades, right? And that degradation is also built in future contracts, just so you know. So if you look at any future contracts have something called an expiry, right? And so typically an expiry date, so there are perpetual futures as well that never expire, but then the cost of keeping a perpetual future contract going on is high because somebody's underwriting it and they take a cut for it to not expire. So it's almost like a brokerage fee that you keep paying to keep a contract alive, right? But traditional contracts actually have an expiry and they expire on a certain date. And if you bought a contract or let's say for $100 and it doesn't go in your favor and nothing bad happens, that doesn't mean at the expiry it'll still be $100 worth, right? So every day closer to the expiry, if the contract is not moving in your favor or the favor of your bet, you tend to lose value closer to the expiry. And that's sort of the time value for money, or the degradation is always factored into most asset classes.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's so long that people don't realize it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And I guess the reason why, when I read through this, it didn't jump out at me as, this is like a commodity, because commodities, apart from things like gold, and I guess they're not really commodities, they're kind of a separate sort of long storage of value sort of thing. But commodities are a hedge against being able to sell that item for consumption within a certain amount of time before the value gets lost, essentially, which isn't really the same thing as GPUs or compute or whatever, because you're not looking at there's not a clock that you're trying to beat in order that you need to offload the asset before you hit the point of spoilage. It's more like the asset, the GPU, should be producing value in the term of revenue that you might get a dividend from or something like that. And in some ways that's not even a very interesting thing. That's sort of like why you would invest in a company that produces value and produces revenue. So maybe that's totally fine, but I guess I have a bit of skepticism around this because of who's involved, what sort of financial engineering has been happened in the AI industry. Plus it has shades of 2007, 2008, when people are trying to wrap up these high risk, fast depreciating potentially assets in something to offload to retail investors, which is
all of that is true,
that's
by
the
the way.
stink around it all, right? Isn't it?
So Sean, all of the things you said is true. So let me flip it the other way, right? If this were to become an investable asset class, as Nvidia wants it to, it's not going to be a highly secure investable asset class. Let's just put it that way. I guess where I'm coming from is I understand why Nvidia would want to make it an asset class, and I understand the argument that they're making, because there are similarities, like I said, with several other degrading prior commodities. I mean, in some ways, you could argue lithium is very similar, because lithium, once turned into a battery, also degrades, albeit a little bit slower, right? It's got twice the lifespan of, let's say, a chip's lifespan, right? So lithium batteries tend to last 8 to 10 years and then sort of degrades, right? But it's still lithium is still a traded asset, right? Because I think the more lithium you get your hands on, you could argue batteries are not assets yet. Lithium is the input, right? And in some ways, that has already happened with GPUs, because GPUs are made up of, I don't know, gold, silver, silicon, a bunch of different things. All of those are currently
But there's
traded.
a brand associated with this one. Like this is the thing
and
that's
the
so
difference.
strange to me.
Yeah.
Is they're saying that AI factories should become like this asset class, but the AI factories are filled with just Nvidia hardware. Like nobody's buying.
Yeah.
Or they're
I think that's
operated
where
by
it
a
becomes,
company as well, right?
Yeah.
Like these factories aren't just sitting there in the ground for us to be able to dig up and throw tokens at. They're operated by a company, so there's so much more, I guess, risk and potential. You should be looking much more at the company that's operating the data center rather than what GPUs are in the data center in order to decide whether you want to invest in it or not.
So like the argument that they're making here is that these AI factories are essentially, it's in here somewhere, but like the point that they're making is that these AI factories are always going to be in demand and they're not built for one specific purpose. Because NVIDIA chips are running models not just for language, but for biology, for chemistry, for all kinds of different things. So
and that's sort of the key differentiator here, Arsalan. I think the point I wanted to close off with was the assumption, like I said, if it does become an investable asset class, it will have its set of risks and it will not be comparable to the other commodities in that sense, because it will be a high risk asset class. I think the people who are going to end up investing in it, whether it's the BlackRocks or an average Joe who wants a piece of this action, will need to invest in it with the idea that time and again, even though there is degradation going on, natural degradation, time and again, there will be spikes of demand for compute that is being operated here, because for some reason there is a natural calamity somewhere, or there is suddenly COVID-19 and doctors want to figure out a million different genomic sequencing. And then the person who's invested in this compute, their compute's going to spike because the token cost is going to spike, right? And so I think I get where they're coming from, because this is sort of the equivalent of airline seats when there's a World Cup final match, right? And do you want first dibs on it for when the World Cup finals are announced, right? There's a little bit of that going on, and that's why it's a financialization of that. I can see where Nvidia is coming from. Would I invest in it? Maybe not. And is it comparable to the other bonds and 7% return stable asset classes? Probably not. This is probably more of a reflection of the financialization times we live in, where, crypto, crazy bets on sort of Kalsi and all of that is normalized. And Nvidia is trying to make the most of that.
Does this worry you? Like, we have a lot of like superannuation funds, for example.
Yeah.
I'm sure whose money is going to go. Like, I don't know who's managing their money, but surely it's going to end up in some way,
in some
shape, or
index
form.
fund or something. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, does this worry you both?
So Arsalan, let me answer that question in a short word and then explain, right? Obviously, it worries me. I'm very worried, right? But also, that point of worry is way past back. I mean, and I think it's seamlessly, we might go into our third topic. We are literally operating in a world where politics and business and crony capitalism has just intertwined itself. And this is just one of the other instruments that is going to do the same, right? I've been in the crypto ecosystem long enough to say I've seen this in crypto, where a very well-intentioned technology built with good intentions to provide and solve a real-world problem has been misused and abused, and the powers that be has come in and distorted it. Similarly, we've seen more recently the use of SEC and the US stock exchange as a dumping ground for SPACs, right? And how SPACs have been basically used as ways in which retail investors are, to put it politely, scammed into buying stocks that have been milked prior by early stage investors, right? There is a proper institutionalization of corruption that's been going on for the last decade or so, at least, if not longer. And this is just going to be one of the other instruments. And I think this started a while back. I think the financial systems have very complicated risk portfolios now. And I think we all are completely exposed to it, right? We saw that even with the Iran war, that even countries and investors that had nothing to do with the US, nothing to do with the Iran war, suddenly find themselves exposed to a completely crazy risk. And we're still trying to figure out why this war even got started, right? Why is it still being prolonged? Why are the oil prices moving the way they're moving, right? And there are literally 5 or 6 people at the helm deciding who gets bombed. When do they talk about they're going to get bombed? How the futures are going to move in the oil prices? When they're going to talk about, peace treaty being signed, and just before they talk about the peace treaty being signed, somebody buying stocks or shorting the oil market because the peace treaty is being signed. Like, this is like high level corruption that's being normalized. And this is just a tiny
Has it
example
just
of
always
that.
been like this? Like I don't know. Maybe it feels like it's much worse now because we hear about it all the time. But I just don't like. It feels like the financial system has always been a place where people get to express their creativity in order to make money, which is what this is. Like, what new
Such
ways
a
can we
charitable
like?
way.
Yeah. But what new ways can we like structure things in order to exploit them? Essentially, yeah. It feels like it's probably always been that way, but it also feels particularly bad at the moment when, like, in the space of 20 years, we've had so many bubble and bust cycles, and the GFC was an opportunity to put some sane regulation in place to sort of prevent this creative financialization. But here we are. Like, it's the same sort of thing.
So, the thing that you just said about the creativity. Do you remember? There's this one scene in The Big Short where I think it's Michael Berry who realizes that the market for CDOs is 20 times larger than the actual bond market. Like, think about the kind of people who are excited about AI. I can't even imagine what kind of weird bets people are going to make if these AI factories become a commodity. Like, is the GPU price going to go up or down? Or how many tokens do you think will be streaming per hour per GPU? Like, it's just the kinds of things people can come up with will be
It's
crazy.
real insanity in that sense. And Sean, coming to your question, right? Like, has it always been like this? I think the answer is yes, by the way, right? Like, it's always been like this. I think the difference why it feels worse or why it's worth talking about today, and maybe it'll be even more worse in the future. I don't know, like worse in the future, right? I think it's important to acknowledge that bad things have happened in human history since humans were around, or for that matter, from the formation of the universe, right? Like, bad things have happened unwittingly, naturally, or whatever. I think what worries me or troubles me is the normalization of these things, right? I think the normalization results in people getting insensitive to ideas that bad things happen and not question it anymore, right? And to me, that is more worrying than do we not have examples 100 years ago, something like this happened. I think we do. Enron, even prior to that, early 90s, Madoff, like, Ponzi, these are all names of people who did big scams and corruption, but they were made examples out of, right?
Yeah.
To walk around as an upstanding human being in the society and yet be corrupt, to me, that is normalization.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, to be clear, when I'm saying has it always been like this, I'm not saying that to sort of excuse what's happening now. I'm saying that from a point of, like, it's incredulous how crazy it's gotten, but also knowing that, for the last 600 years, we've had this financial system essentially that has, at some point, 600 years ago, someone said, hey, we should be able to invest in companies and you get this thing called a stock. I'm sure people thought that was crazy. But then now it just seems insanely more complicated and engineered to exploit, not benefit. Like, before, if you bought a stock in the Dutch East India Company, you were banking on them being able to sail their ships somewhere to do some horrible thing to put on the flag of colonialism, like, not to sort of wash all that away. There was definitely some stuff, abhorrent stuff going on there, but you would carry the risk that company would be able to carry out their plan and generate a profit.
Yeah, and plus they couldn't say it. Like, it's not like they could come and say, hey, we whipped the crap out of 1 million people there so that you can make money. They would have to work hard to hide it, right?
So maybe that's today, the answer. It's always been going on.
And look,
I don't know.
Just to sort of circle.
We should. Sorry for taking us into a colonialism discussion.
No, and don't be sorry. I think it's an important point you're making, right? That So I'm not saying that that's not the case, right? I guess point really. So for me, the worry is, let's put it as an extreme thing, right? B schools in 5 years, business schools in 5 years could actually start teaching MBAs how to do financial engineering because it's become so normalized. Like they could do away with the ethics course and they could say, oh, you know what? We're going to teach you a course on how to engineer a product out of nowhere, almost like creative engineering, like give it a spin. Like you said, it's a form of art, right? And then they'd say, how do you look at a lovely little cafe and say, how can I create derivatives out of this cafe because some passionate guy is running it, and now destroy that? And you and I have been victims of this financial engineering through our startups, right? Where a boatload of money is pumped into something to hype up a story with the hope that somebody else buys into that story. But if they don't, you're the one who's sort of left holding a bag because you were trying to build something actually valuable, meaningful, and that story didn't sell, right? Or somebody called the truth out, right? And said, oh, actually, it's not as exciting as you making it out to be. But the incentives aligned for people who do those investments and say, yep, we can hype it up. We can keep hyping it up. We can keep hyping it up till the last man holding the bag is a retail investor.
Yeah.
Who suddenly buys into the hype, takes all the shares and says, okay, now for the next 10 years, this is going to buy me my next house. And there is no house, right?
Yeah.
So
maybe it's just a simple thing of like, maybe I'm overthinking it and like getting into like historical context too much. And the problem maybe it's a good segue into our next topic, that is really just a story of corruption. Like the people who are supposed to be the watchdogs over the system are the same people. They're all friends with the people who are exploiting the system. They're all sitting around counting their money and figuring out how they can make more money. And then the people who control the regulators are also friends with them and are also making billions of dollars off this whole process anyway. And it's just that it's simple. Like it's a simple corruption story.
So Arsalan, do you want to pull up that news story that Sean's referring to about Trump's proposal to have a subscription for his Truth Social posts and getting people to be able to pay to access his what's a Truth Social post called? Trust?
I think they truth out. They truth. I don't know.
Truths. To get access to his truths. A few seconds before everyone else gets.
It's so ridiculously Orwellian. Like.
Yeah, it's not even 1984. It's like 1972.
And also, like, did you see the? I don't know if it was on Truth Social or if it was on Twitter, but the post he made right after this announcement, it was like big beautiful candles, which is like he was referring to like the stock charts, which I think is just the most ridiculous thing.
Beautiful candles. I can't believe he said that.
He has no class, like he has no refinement that you expect of a world leader. Like big beautiful candles is his tweet.
All three of us are never getting entry into the US again, at least while Trump is president. So there goes that.
Yeah, that's done.
So what's the story, Arsalan? If you could just
quickly,
and then I want to get Sean's take.
Yeah, so the story is Trump basically announced that, you know how like content creators will allow people to access these exclusive posts on a website like Patreon, for example. You can go and support a creator. And so what he's done is he's basically said that I'm going to post things on Truth Social. And if you want to get early access to this information, you have to pay $100,000 a month for it. And this headline claims that there are 10 companies that have already signed up. What information is going to be present in those Truth Social posts? Like, we can only hazard a guess, but if it's worth $100,000, it's clearly like very valuable. It's like the Bloomberg terminal of corruption. It's like, of course, this is what's happening. And you get it faster.
And this is what I really mean, Sean, like from my previous comment, right? Like the institutionalization of corruption to the point where, and what does corruption even mean? Like one could argue, okay, if you have the money, buy it. But this is what it means, that if you are rich, you'll get richer. And the person who doesn't have the money doesn't get to participate. And I think that's sort of what corruption really means anywhere in the world, where people with means can just make sure they use their means to protect their means. And in fact, rob other people's resources through that process.
And different rules for different classes of people. Like this is basically saying if you have the money, this is how much it costs for you to do insider trading, and you have enough money that it makes it. You get. I'm sure that people who are subscribing up to this will get an excellent ROI. Good luck to them. But if I or if any of us in our capacity as employees, board members, advisors, whatever, did what was traditionally considered insider trading, then we get in trouble for it.
Yep, no, 100%. And so Sean, let's flip this around, right? Because I think we know that this is happening, And I think people are now starting to talk about it, which is a good starting point, because I think people need to call it out and not be okay with it. But also, like, how does one turn this around? How do people get power back? What's the way to do it? Because I think the more interesting conversation is options and choices that we as, I don't know, I wouldn't say, like, we're still quite privileged in the way we have access to resources and we have access to opportunities. But how do people like us take some of this power back when, let's say, the real 1% or less than 1%, these guys are like the 100 top powerful people in the world trying to just like scratch each other's back, right? How do we sort of change this? And is technology going to be able to enable us?
I mean, I don't want to turn this into a history podcast, but how has this sort of situation changed in history when similar sort of levels of inequality and corruption have arisen?
Are you saying we bring back certain medieval equipment?
No, I would just say, like, I don't think there's any reason to think that, like, yeah, that's why they want to build robots.
And all of them have underground bunkers.
Yeah.
Like, like well, Sam Altman has one, and Peter Thiel has one in New Zealand, right? Like, that's nearby.
Okay.
Jeez. Okay, like, I'll hazard an actual answer to that question is, like, how do you get the power back? I think one of the big reasons Trump is able to do what he can do, like you said, is people are desensitized, but there's another half of people that still actively vote for, that party because they believe in the personality that is Trump. And I think they feel threatened by politics that doesn't align with their values. And I think the most important thing to do is actually have like conversations where you're not alienating people. The people like Trump and people who are part of this corruption benefit greatly from the polarization that exists within communities, right? And they create these, like, they are experts at leveraging policies for their own benefits, even if they are talking about the opposite in, at the polls. So I think if we want to work back in a nonviolent way, then we have to reverse that polarization that exists. That is like the only way to actually do it.
Corrupted themselves. Sure,
you think it's going to end
optimistic? Yeah, I don't know whether that was an optimistic take. It started optimistically in favor.
Yeah.
But yeah. Like that. Yeah, but history will continue regardless of what happens in like the now and our lives. But I do think it is. There's a combination of a bunch of different factors that makes like now quite extraordinary. Yeah, technology and the interconnectedness and like globalization of economies, culture, to the point where a tiny war on the other side of the world impacts how much bread costs on the other side. Like that has never happened before. Corruption being almost institutionalized, like the Citizens United ruling in the US, where basically money can get fed into politicians, enabling rich people to basically buy power, which, I mean, to buy political power. Yeah, like, so there's a lot of, and it's no coincidence that that's coupled with like the largest inequality that we've ever really seen between like the richest people and the rest of us. And you throw in the fact how governments are so in debt now as well, like the Australian government debt. I think it just crossed $1 trillion, which is like crazy. Which, what comes off the back of that as well is like, when governments are in debt, that impacts people and impacts tax rates, impacts social programs. You get into this period of austerity. All of these things are pushing us towards more extremism, more tension, more corruption. Like, I don't see how maybe I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong, but it's hard to see how a peaceful political solution of people educating themselves and no, I mean to like, I hate to like, but I mean, I'm talking more about Arsalan's point of like convincing people, I guess the competition of ideas, the healthy competition of ideas that like should underlie a functioning democracy. But I would love it if that is the way this, and as the representation of the younger generations, no patronization there intended, you should definitely be optimistic. I'll wear the grumpy old like pessimist hat, but it's just hard to see with like that kind of conflation of issues that it doesn't really, and like I said, you look through history, when these things have happened before, it gets bad. We've just in a world that is like technologically accelerated and interconnected like it's never been before, which like that's a multiplicative effect, right? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think like I think from our generation's perspective, it's like I think the most important thing to point out is that we are probably the most far removed from war of like all the politically active generations right now. Like for us, World War II was like less of a history lesson and more of like a Oscars topic, you know, like that's how I learned about World War II was just Hollywood. And then I went and read a bit more. And even like the wars that followed, it's like if you grow up in a peaceful country, if you're privileged enough to grow up in a peaceful country, you look at those things through like television or a computer and it abstracts so much of the mess of violence away from the way you think. Excuse me. The problem for us, like the younger generation right now, is that if you put me in a room with anybody from any part of the world who's my age, chances are that we're going to see eye to eye on like most things. There are very few people that we wouldn't agree with. So if we say that there's like violence on the horizon, well, not on the horizon, but like some ways away, like who is that violence going to be targeted towards, right? Like it's not like there is somebody that we know is going to be on the receiving end of it where we can conclusively say, yeah, that person had it coming. Right. This is like the violence doesn't flow upward. And if there is violence on the horizon, it's going to be, I think right now, it's going to be like, it's going to be directed in the wrong places. Of course. That's why I think about that's why I think the polarization thing is interesting because like if this is only a battle against people who are, if they're robbing they're robbing everybody. We're here in Australia, which is a very peaceful country. We're feeling the pressure of what's happening. Right. Of course. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, we can
But
sit on this call and talk about it for
there you go.
an hour and a half. Yeah.
Thankfully, exactly. Thankfully, right? But the point is like, I think there's a way for all of this to just resolve itself in the space of a generation where people aren't like the problem right now is that the role models all are just saying you have to lean into the problem and get out ahead of the competition. And that's the only way to survive, right? Like, for example, if we talk about a very simple problem that we were discussing a few days ago about like social life and how social media is completely wrecking everything or the noise that's generated online, on LinkedIn, for example, our generation is looking up to people like Gary Vaynerchuk who are like, dude, just pick up your phone and record a video and put yourself out there. And if you want to get the right partner for your life, you have to go to the gym every day and be disciplined and you have to do this. And like these ex-Navy SEALs, not Gary Vaynerchuk, but like these ex-Navy SEALs, they'll be like, oh, you've made no progress and who's going to do this and who's going to carry the boat, son? Like you just have like these weird characters online that are teaching you that the only way out of this is to like lean into the mess, right? Whereas I think we've got so much good stuff figured out that like in a generation, it's very easy for us to be like, okay, we're done with social media algorithms. Like we're done with optimizing algorithms for an enterprise's goal. And that resolves so much of the problems, right? It doesn't solve corruption. That's a different thing. But the reason I want to minimize polarization is because inevitably what's going to happen is that when times get tough, people get more conservative and they look for an enemy. And when you're looking for an enemy, your government can very easily say, that's the guy who wants the wheat because there's only enough, like there's not enough to go around. Of course, you're going to go to war. You have to feed your kids. Like that's what you're going to do, right? So if it was as simple as like, we know that there are some oligarchs and those are the only people who have to be, eliminated. Like we have to minimize their influence.
Yeah. Yeah, you're going to have some serious editing to do on this one, Arsalan.
Honestly, goodness. Yeah, we should probably wrap up. We're losing our minds. Yeah, definitely.
Like ones to go to air or whether we should like look back over this and yeah.
Excellent. All right, so that was a good, healthy discussion. I think we covered a lot of good things. If you listen to the end, you probably got some entertainment out of it and hopefully some good things to think about.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for watching. Yeah, sure. And thank you, Sean, for being here. And
my pleasure.
We'll see you all in the next one very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.